Once there was a preacher by the name of Ted Haggard who stumbled from the path, or you might even say staggered. He was 1 in a million, or more aptly 1 in 10. Some folks say he put the men in amen. He preached the gospel message of intolerance and self-loathing, and traveled on his wayward way betraying his betrothing. He was the soul of piety and no one doubted him, until he hired a gigolo and used a pseudonym. So he humbly went to counseling, and then 3 weeks later he's born again. Because Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual. Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. It is Sunday, June 1st, 2008. That was Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual.
It's possible that he may be on a cell phone and getting a really bad signal coming into us.
Try once again, Mike.
He's all broken up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, we just couldn't hear you. We were getting like fragments of your words.
I wish we'd have gotten a list of what Mike's question was, and we could have addressed it anyway.
If they remember.
Could we make it up?
How much wood could a woodchuck chug?
Well, I mean, if we took a bet, lately we've been getting more callers that are, you know, kind of leaning our way than the opposition. I don't get a whole lot of Christian callers calling in to tell me what's in the Bible, because, well, most of them figured out I already know. But if it was somebody who's not an atheist who was trying to explain why we're wrong, my bet is on Pascal's wager.
Okay.
Or maybe have you looked outside at the trees? That's a good one. How could you say there's no God? Haven't you ever looked outside at the trees? Where did the trees come from?
God is the Lorax.
Martin, where did trees come from?
Well, once upon a time there was a mommy tree and a daddy tree who loved each other very much.
Oh, no.
Yes. And the rest of it you can read about in Song of Solomon.
Oh.
Yeah, because where it gets all hot and sweaty. You know, you do seem to get, and I see this on the blog quite a bit, you know, you'll get some a guy who's like just discovered apologetics in his church or some Sunday school class, or some guy comes by and he'll hit you.
He's watched the Way of the Master series, and
and they
he's ready to tackle us evil baby killing atheists.
Every time we think we've put something really silly like Pascal's wager to bed, along comes some guy who, and of course we're not saying Mike may very well have had an incredibly intelligent. We're just like going on and on.
Mike being a brilliant guy,
smart guy, but and the control room doesn't remember what his question was, even if he gave it. But you know, they come on and they think it's this incredibly brilliant stumper that they can hit us with. It's sort of like, whoa, you know, you can't prove God doesn't exist. So it's like, you know, and the whole one that we got recently on the blog was this whole sort of the whole atheism requires as much faith as belief that one, and we got the usual litany of, okay, well, you can't prove that a God doesn't exist, so you know, therefore, you know, both disbelief, you know, so not believing in God is just as much of a faith choice as believing in God, and at that point it becomes the whole, you know, argument from appeal to popularity fallacy, right?
Almost, yeah.
And that's usually the direction it goes. And the way I customarily respond to those is to tell them, all right, take that sentence that you just wrote. You know, if you don't believe in God, delete God and insert any other mythical creature that you can think of right now: flying spaghetti monster, unicorns, leprechauns. You know, it takes as much faith not to believe in leprechauns as it does to believe in leprechauns. So which do you choose? So clearly this isn't how knowledge works. This isn't how we look at evidence.
So the examples that I used in the email, because this is exactly what this guy did.
Is this one of the emails that you were talking about?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It's fairies, pixies, ghosts, Bigfoot, souls, afterlives, unicorns, dragons, telepathy, etc.
Right. Yeah.
All of those things. I mean, two things don't become equally likely just because you cannot absolutely confirm either of them.
Right.
If the religious can't prove that God exists and you atheists can't prove that he doesn't. Well, first of all, we don't have any burden of proof. Those making the claim that something exists have a burden of proof, and if they fail to meet it, disbelief, rejection of their claim is justified.
And if you're not buying that position, again, just, pretend we're not talking about God, and pretend that we are talking about the Loch Ness Monster.
Loch Ness Monster, because that wasn't on my list.
Yeah.
So those people who claim that the Loch Ness Monster exists have a burden of proof. If they fail to meet it, disbelieving their claim is what is justified. Now,
do people who decide they don't believe in the Loch Ness Monster have an equal amount of proof, a burden of proof, to say, no, this thing doesn't exist?
No.
Right. Because, again, the burden of proof for any claim, especially if it's an extraordinary claim, always is going to rely on the person claiming the existence of the thing in question. If Matt tells me he's got some invisible dragon living in his backyard, you know, it's not up to me to prove to him that his invisible dragon doesn't exist.
Now, there's different positions, and this is something that I'm actually trying to touch a little bit on in the next lecture, which kind of uses Venn diagrams to show the difference between truth values and what our beliefs are about truth values. Because in truth, God either exists or he doesn't exist. Those are the only two possibilities for any definition of God. It's either exists or doesn't exist, true or not true. However, your belief state on those can be varied. You can believe a God exists. You can not believe a God exists, which is everything outside of that. You can believe that no gods exist, which is an opposite proposition.
And for the sake of this discussion, we are assuming that we know what is even meant by the term God.
Yes,
right?
and it's all dependent on definitions. So the thing is where do your labels fit? You know, a theist is somebody who believes in God, and an atheist, or perhaps you'd prefer non-theist, is anybody who doesn't. And then you have an agnostic is this kind of attempt at a middle ground, but in actuality they're atheists, non-theists as well, because they're not accepting the theist proposition. If, however, I claim that I am a Gnostic theist, that I believe in fact that there are no gods, which is something I'll claim as long as we can agree that knowledge is not absolute certainty, it's just a degree of belief. And I want to convince you of that, then I have a burden of proof. I have some obligation to convince you that my position is not just justified for me, but justified for you as well.
For example, if you are, and this is a lot of believers make this mistake in sort of defining atheism as this, in those terms, rather than understanding, for example, the difference between what we usually call strong atheism and weak atheism, whereas there's a big difference between disbelieving God claims, not believing that a God exists, and claiming to know, in other words, believing very strongly, and not even believing, but claiming to know and being able to say firmly that nothing that can possibly be called a God could possibly exist. Which, you know, when Jeff D. and I were doing the show, you know, Jeff's example was always, okay, let's see, if I meet somebody who is a sun worshiper, and he decides the sun is his God, right? And he bows down to it. Well, I would be a theist in terms of that God, because I can look and go, sure enough, there's a sun up there. So I can, now, I may or may not agree with this guy on his sun god having any sort of divine or magical properties. But if he wants to call that his God and say, there's my God, I can look in the sky and go, sure enough, there it is. Well, how about that? So I would be technically, you know, a theist where that God is concerned, although I would not necessarily be a worship. You know, again, there's a difference between
and adherent. And
so that's the big difference is terms like, and I would be probably a Gnostic theist also, in terms, because I could say yes, I know, but that's the difference between the two terms, Gnosticism and agnosticism, and theism and atheism. Is that theism and atheism are belief claims. They're in terms of what do I believe is the state of things about the question of whether or not God exists. Gnosticism and agnosticism, on the other hand, are epistemological claims. They have to do with what it is that we know or don't know.
Which means you not only need to define what you're talking about specifically, but you also need to come up with a definition of what qualifies as knowledge. Because that can change whether or not you're Gnostic or agnostic on an issue.
And so it would be in terms of, so the differences between what a knowledge claim in terms of, you know, what you think you do or do not know about the existence of God, and then, based on that or either not based on that, what do you believe about the existence or non-existence of knowledge and belief? Two very different things, and they quite often get conflated. They're related to one another. I mean, one informs the other. Knowledge informs belief, and probably vice versa. But they are different when you get right down to the nitty-gritty.
There was a preacher by the name of Ted Haggard who stumbled from the path, or you might even say staggered. He was 1 in a million, or more aptly 1 in 10. Some folks say he put the men in amen.